When my husband stood up to give a toast at our son's wedding, I thought I knew what he was going to say. Something proud, something sentimental, something about love lasting a lifetime. Instead, he raised his glass, looked straight at me and said, "After today, I'll be starting a new chapter with someone else." This is the end for us. There was a pause so heavy, even the air seemed to stop moving. The string quartet stopped playing mid-note. The chatter died. Every pair of eyes turned to me. The mother of the groom, the wife who just got left in front of 100 people. I remember the champagne flute trembling in my hand, the sound of it tapping the glass plate when I set it down. The bride's mother gasped. My son's smile froze halfway, and somewhere in the back of the hall, a woman I didn't recognize lowered her gaze. I wanted to scream, to faint, to demand an explanation. But instead, I did what I had always done in 40 years of marriage. I stayed composed. I smiled gently, the kind of smile you wear when you've been trained to keep peace, no matter how much you're breaking inside. I walked out of the wedding hall before anyone could follow me. My heels echoed on the marble floor. Outside, the sky had turned from gold to gray, as if the heavens themselves disapproved of what had just happened. That was the day my marriage ended. The day the life I thought I'd built on love and trust crumbled in a single public sentence. I should probably start from the beginning. Before that wedding, before the whispers and humiliation, we were a family like any other. Ordinary, imperfect, held together by small rituals and unspoken compromises. My name is Elaine, and I turned 60 the week before my son's wedding. I used to joke that life after 60 is supposed to be quiet. Early dinners, gentle mornings, maybe a little gardening and some peace. But peace isn't something you can plan. It's something that can vanish in an instant. My husband Gerald and I had been married 40 years. He was my college sweetheart. Steady, handsome in a reliable sort of way. Always good with people. The kind of man who made everyone feel seen, even if that meant I sometimes felt invisible. We had one child, Michael, our miracle baby after years of trying. I poured everything into raising him. The packed lunches, the late-night fevers, the quiet sacrifices that no one writes songs about. Gerald worked hard at his construction business, while I managed our home and later helped with bookkeeping. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was solid, or so I believed. When Michael met Emily, a sweet young woman who worked in marketing, I was overjoyed. She reminded me of myself at that age. Polite, eager to please, always trying to do the right thing. Their wedding felt like the crown jewel of my motherhood. The day my boy would become a husband, the day I could finally exhale. In the months leading up to the ceremony, Gerald seemed distracted. At first, I thought it was just the stress of the wedding costs. He was handling most of the payments, the venue, the caterer, even the down payment for Michael and Emily's new apartment. Sometimes he'd come home late, saying he had to meet a supplier or sort out the bank transfers. I didn't question him. After 40 years, you learn which silences to ignore. Still, there were small things. Forgotten details that gnawed at the edges of my trust. He started wearing cologne again, the same brand he'd stopped using decades ago. His phone, once left carelessly on the counter, now never left his pocket. And when I asked about it, he'd chuckle softly, saying, "Elaine, you worry too much." It's just business, I believed him. Or maybe I wanted to. Because believing otherwise would mean acknowledging that I had built my life around a man who no longer saw me. The night before the wedding, we sat side by side in our hotel room. He was scrolling on his phone, smiling faintly at the screen. I asked, "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" He looked up, almost startled, then forced a small laugh. "Nervous? About our son getting married? No, I'm proud." He kissed my forehead, said goodnight, and turned off the light. But I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing. Slow, steady, indifferent. Something inside me whispered, "You're losing him." The morning of the wedding was chaos. Hair appointments, flowers arriving late, the photographer bustling in and out of rooms. But when I saw Michael standing in front of the mirror in his tuxedo, my heart swelled. He looked so grown, so happy. I thought, this is it. The hard years were worth it. The ceremony was perfect. The sun poured golden light through the church windows. I cried softly during the vows, clutching Gerald's hand. He didn't squeeze back. At the reception, laughter filled the hall, plates clinked, music floated in the air. I remember thinking, this is what joy feels like. Then came the toast. Gerald stood up, glass in hand, smiling that charming, practiced smile. He started by thanking everyone, the guests, the bride's family, the organizers. People laughed when he told a story about Michael's childhood, how he once tried to fix a broken bike with tape. Everyone relaxed, then his tone changed. He glanced at me, and the warmth left his eyes. He said, 40 years ago, I married Elaine. She's been a wonderful wife, a loving mother, and a patient companion. But sometimes life brings new beginnings, even when we least expect them. After today, I'll be starting a new chapter. With someone else. This is the end for us at first. People thought he was joking. There was laughter, short, uncertain. Then silence. Even the band stopped playing. My son's fork clattered against his plate. Dad, what are you saying? He asked, voice shaking. But Gerald didn't answer. He just raised his glass again, nodded slightly toward the back of the hall, and said softly, to new beginnings. I followed his gaze. That's when I saw her. A woman, maybe in her early 30s, with long dark hair and a dress too elegant for a guest no one knew. She couldn't meet my eyes. My body went cold. My heart pounded so hard it hurt to breathe. I stood up slowly, straightened my dress, and said only one thing. Enjoy your new beginning, Gerald. Then I turned and walked out of that hall. Outside, the autumn air hit me like a slap. I could still hear the murmurs inside, the confusion, the whispers, but all I felt was silence. Deep, aching silence. That's how 40 years of love ended. Not with a fight, not with a goodbye, but with a toast. People often say that a marriage doesn't crumble overnight, that it erodes slowly, like a shoreline losing ground to the waves. I didn't see the erosion happening, or maybe I chose not to. When Gerald and I met, we were just two young dreamers trying to make a life out of love and borrowed time. I was 19, studying literature and working evenings at a diner. He was 23, tall, with the kind of quiet confidence that made me feel safe. He used to walk me home after my shifts, holding my hand as if it were something precious. He'd talk about building houses one day, not just for others, but for us. One with a big kitchen and a porch where you can drink tea, he'd say. And we did build it, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck. Our first home wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms and peeling wallpaper. But it was ours, and it was filled with laughter, even when money was tight. We'd dance in the living room after dinner, barefoot with the radio humming softly. Those were the moments that made me believe in forever. But forever doesn't look the same after 40 years. When Michael was born, everything shifted. Gerald threw himself into his business. Long hours, endless site visits, constant phone calls. I stayed home, learning the rhythm of diapers and lullabies, balancing budgets, stretching every dollar. It was exhausting, but I was happy to do it. He was the provider. I was the nurturer. That's how it worked, or so I thought. There were good years, family trips to the lake, Sunday barbecues, Christmas mornings when Michael's laughter filled the house. But there were also long silences. Gerald was often distracted, too tired to talk, too busy to listen. And every time I tried to bring it up, he'd sigh and say, "Elaine, you worry too much." We're fine. So I stopped worrying. Or rather, I learned to keep my worries quiet. When Michael left for college, the house became too big, too still. I thought Gerald and I would finally have time for each other, maybe travel, start a hobby, rediscover what it meant to just be us. But instead, he worked even more. Dinner became a quiet routine. 2 plates, polite conversation, and the sound of the clock ticking in between our words. Sometimes, he'd come home smelling faintly of whiskey and unfamiliar perfume. I told myself it was probably from a business dinner. It was easier than imagining the alternative. Still, I noticed things. Receipts from restaurants we'd never visited, a second phone charger in his car, a change in the passwords to our joint bank account. Each little clue felt like a stone in my stomach. But every time I considered confronting him, I'd hear that old voice in my head. The one that said, "Keep the peace. Don't make a scene. Be the good wife." So I waited. I convinced myself that loyalty meant silence. In the months before the wedding, Gerald began withdrawing money more often. He said it was for wedding expenses, deposits, tips, last-minute costs. I believed him, because why wouldn't I? We'd always shared everything. But there was one afternoon that stuck with me, the day I stopped pretending not to notice. I had gone to the bank to update some documents, and the teller, a kind young man who'd known us for years, looked at me with a trace of hesitation. "Mrs. Thompson," he said gently, "are you aware of the transfers your husband's been making to the other account?" "What other account?" I asked. He frowned slightly. "It's a joint account under his name, and someone named Rachel D. I assumed it was family." My heart skipped a beat. I managed to smile and said, "Yes, family." But I didn't know a Rachel D. I didn't know what that account was. All I knew was that something was unraveling, and I didn't have the strength to pull the thread. When I asked Gerald about it that night, he waved it off. "Oh, that's one of the subcontractors. We opened it to manage payments. Nothing to worry about." And once again, I told myself not to worry. A few weeks before the wedding, I caught him standing on the back porch, talking on his phone. His tone was soft. Too soft. He said, "You know I can't leave before the wedding. It would look bad." Then, after a pause, "I promise. Just a little longer." When he turned and saw me, he smiled quickly, ending the call. "Supplier," he said. But his eyes didn't meet mine. That night, I sat in bed with the lamp off, staring into the dark, my hands trembling beneath the blanket. I could have confronted him. I could have demanded answers. But I didn't. Because I still wanted to believe in the man who once danced with me barefoot in our living room. The day before the wedding, I found a folded letter in his jacket pocket, a hotel reservation for 2, dated 2 days after the ceremony. The name Rachel D. was printed beside his. I remember standing there in our bedroom, the sound of the clock ticking louder than my own heartbeat. I placed the letter back exactly where I found it. And that night, when he came to bed, I said nothing, because part of me needed to see if he would still go through with it. If the man I loved could truly stand before our son, in front of everyone we knew, and destroy me so publicly. I got my answer. When I walked out of that wedding hall after his toast, I didn't cry, not right away. I drove back to the hotel, locked myself in the bathroom, and stared at my reflection. There I was, 60 years old, wrinkles and all, a woman who had given everything, her youth, her loyalty, her trust. And in return, I got humiliation wrapped in a champagne toast. But something strange happened that night. Between the tears and the silence, I felt a calm settle over me, the kind of calm that only comes when you've lost everything you were afraid to lose. I whispered to myself, "He doesn't get to break me." And that was the beginning. Not of the end, but of my awakening. The morning after the wedding, the world outside my window looked deceptively ordinary. Birds still sang, sunlight still spilled across the curtains, and yet everything had changed. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to replay his words. After today, I'll be starting a new chapter with someone else. This is the end for us. I remember the exact sound of gasps in that hall, the scraping of chairs, the whispers, My son, Michael, frozen mid-toast, his mouth half open, the microphone in his hand trembling. That sound, that silence that followed, will stay with me until my last breath. I didn't go to the reception afterward. I couldn't. I didn't want to ruin my son's day any more than it already was. I told Michael's wife, Emma, quietly that I wasn't feeling well and slipped out the side door while everyone was still processing the scene. In the car, my hands were shaking so badly I had to pull over. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was disbelief. That a man could plan something like that, rehearse it, and still smile through it. But the disbelief quickly turned into something colder. Resolve. That night, I sat at the desk in the hotel room, opened my laptop, and started looking. I logged into our joint bank account again, the one I hadn't checked in months. I'd always trusted him to manage our finances. But now every number on that screen looked like a secret, waiting to be uncovered. And there it was. Transfer after transfer to the same name, Rachel D. Each one labeled as consulting fees or project costs. But I knew better. I clicked through them slowly, methodically, until I saw the one that made my stomach drop. A payment for a luxury apartment lease, signed by both of them. He hadn't just cheated. He'd been building a life with her. The realization was sharp but strangely clarifying. Every late night, every business trip, every time he'd brushed off my questions, they all clicked into place like puzzle pieces finally forming the picture I didn't want to see. I sat there for hours, scrolling, my tea going cold beside me, until I felt my heart harden. When I finally closed the laptop, I whispered out loud, "All right, Gerald. Let's see who you really are." In the days that followed, I moved carefully, quietly. I didn't call him. I didn't confront him. Instead, I gathered what I needed. At 60, you don't have the luxury of storming out and starting fresh without a plan. You learn to move with patience, to let truth do the work for you. I called the bank again, this time speaking to a senior manager I knew from years of being a loyal customer. "I'm afraid my husband's been making financial decisions without my consent," I said. "I just want to make sure everything is above board." She hesitated but agreed to email me copies of all joint account activity from the last 2 years. When I opened that spreadsheet later, I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how sloppy he'd been. Luxury jewelry, travel tickets, spa retreats, hotel reservations. Some even listed Rachel Dawson as the guest name. He hadn't even tried to hide it properly. And that's when I realized something painful but freeing. He didn't think I'd ever look. He didn't think I had the strength to. To him, I was the quiet wife. Predictable, compliant, too soft to fight back. He'd mistaken my grace for weakness. A few days later, I met Michael for coffee. He looked tired, like someone carrying more than his share of guilt. "Mom," he said softly, "I don't know what to say about what happened." I smiled gently. "It's not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is." But he looked away, his jaw tightening. "Dad told me you'd been distant lately, that you two had grown apart." There it was, the first seed of manipulation. I took a deep breath and said, "Michael, your father's been living a double life, and he used your wedding to make his exit." He blinked, stunned. "What are you talking about?" I turned my phone toward him and showed him the bank transfers, line after line of proof. Dates, amounts, names. His face went pale. He took this from the business account too. That's where these transfers are coming from." "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning in. Michael rubbed his forehead. "Dad's been in charge of payroll and supplier payments for months. If he's been diverting money, that means he's been draining the company." My company. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of the cafe filled the silence. Then Michael whispered, "He used my wedding to cover his tracks, didn't he?" I nodded slowly. Yes, he wanted to make sure everyone saw him as a man leaving with dignity, not the man who betrayed his family. That evening, Michael called him. I could hear the shouting from across the house, the anger in his voice, the denial in Gerald's. It ended with Michael slamming the phone down and saying he's still with her. He said he's in love. Something in me broke then. Not because of the betrayal, but because of the sheer audacity of it. 40 years of my life reduced to a line in his new love story, but anger wasn't going to save me. Truth would. And truth, I was learning, was best revealed slowly. The next day, I contacted a lawyer, an old friend from college who'd helped me once with a property matter. I explained everything, the affair, the financial transfers, the public humiliation. She listened quietly, then said, "Elaine, you have more power than you think. Don't confront him yet. Let's document everything. If he's been using marital funds to support another woman, that's grounds for both financial and emotional restitution." Restitution. That word felt like a lifeline. For the first time since the wedding, I slept peacefully. Because I wasn't helpless anymore, I was preparing. Weeks passed. I didn't tell anyone else. I kept to my routines, morning walks, volunteering at the library, dinners alone in the house that suddenly felt too big. But beneath that calm exterior, I was building something. A quiet case of truth and dignity. Every receipt, every transaction, every message I could find went into a folder, and when it was complete, I placed it on my lawyer's desk. "Are you ready?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "Not yet," I said. "I want him to see what he's lost before the papers arrive." Because some lessons don't come from lawyers, they come from life itself. And life, I knew, was about to teach Gerald Thompson everything he'd tried to forget. The first time I saw Gerald after the wedding was 3 weeks later. He'd called, his tone clipped and formal, as if we were distant acquaintances. "Elaine," he said, "I think we should talk, privately." I almost laughed. Privately? After he'd declared our marriage over in front of 200 people? But I agreed. Not because I wanted closure from him, but because I was ready for him to see that I wasn't the woman he left behind. We met at a quiet cafe near the construction firm we'd built together decades ago. It was where we used to come every Friday after work, back when we still shared dreams instead of silence. He arrived in a crisp shirt and a smug expression, his hair newly dyed, his watch gleaming. I noticed the faint cologne he always wore when he was trying to impress someone. He sat across from me as if nothing had happened. "Elaine," he said, smiling tightly. "I didn't want things to end the way they did." I was emotional that day. "Emotional?" I repeated, my voice steady. "You announced your affair at our son's wedding, Gerald." He sighed, looking away. "You're exaggerating." I just wanted to be honest, to stop living a lie. I felt my fingers tighten around my teacup. "And you thought humiliating me in front of our family was the honest way?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I wanted to settle things peacefully," he said. "We both know it's over. I'm offering you a fair amount, enough to live comfortably." He slid the envelope across the table. For a moment, I didn't move. Then I opened it. Inside was a single check, an amount that might have insulted even a stranger, let alone a woman who'd built his life beside him. I looked up at him. "This is your idea of fairness?" He shrugged. "Rachel and I are starting something new. I can't afford to split everything right now, but I'll take care of you. I'm not heartless." I leaned back, letting his words hang between us. "You're right," I said finally. "You're not heartless. You just have a selective memory." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" I smiled, calm, deliberate. "You seem to have forgotten whose name is on half your assets, the business, the house, the accounts, and you seem to have forgotten that siphoning money from our joint funds for your affair is called financial misconduct." His face paled slightly. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my purse and slid a small folder across the table. copies of the bank records, transfers, and property documents. His hands hesitated before opening it. I watched his eyes dart from line to line, his expression shifting from confusion to panic. "How did you find out?" I interrupted, "because unlike you, Gerald, I don't underestimate people." For a long moment he sat there, speechless. Then he chuckled weakly, trying to recover. "You wouldn't really take this to court. It would destroy everything. Think about Michael." I looked at him steadily. "I am thinking about Michael. He deserves to know who his father really is." That's when he dropped the mask. His voice turned sharp, defensive. "You always wanted control. Even now you can't let go. You'd rather ruin your family than admit you drove me away." I let him finish. Then, quietly, I said, "I didn't drive you away, Gerald." I just stopped looking the other way. I stood up, gathered my things, and said, "You should get a good lawyer. I already have one." And then I walked out, steady, head high, feeling lighter than I had in years. In the following weeks, the legal process began. My lawyer moved swiftly, freezing certain accounts, filing for division of assets, and documenting every trace of financial misconduct. Gerald fought it at first. His lawyer tried to paint him as emotionally neglected, as though betrayal was a reasonable response to loneliness. But the evidence was airtight. Every dollar he spent on Rachel came from our shared savings or business profits. Michael refused to speak to him. He'd gone through the company books and discovered that Gerald's withdrawals had left several payments pending, putting the business at risk. It took weeks to repair the damage. When Gerald tried to call, Michael ignored him. When he showed up at the office, security escorted him out. I didn't enjoy seeing him fall, not the way people might expect. There was no satisfaction in watching someone you once loved lose everything. But there was peace in knowing that I'd finally stopped protecting a man who never protected me. A month later, Rachel called me. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Thompson?" Her voice was soft, nervous. "This is Rachel Dawson." For a moment, I said nothing. I wanted to hang up, but something in her tone made me stay. She hesitated. "I thought you should know. Gerald told me he'd finalized the divorce. He said you were fine with everything." I almost laughed. "Did he also tell you where the money came from?" She went quiet. "What do you mean?" I told her, calmly, factually, that every gift, every trip, every apartment payment had come from funds tied to our business and marriage, that his lies had nearly cost our son his company. She didn't respond for a long time. When she finally did, her voice trembled. "I didn't know," she whispered. "He said he was divorced already. He said you were cold." "I was loyal," I said softly. "He just mistook that for weakness." She began to cry, quietly, almost apologetically. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "I believe you," I replied, "but he'll hurt you too. Just be careful." And then I ended the call. It wasn't revenge, it was closure. Because sometimes the best punishment is letting the truth reach the right ears. 2 months later, Gerald tried to come back. By then, Rachel had left him. She discovered that he'd been using her the same way he'd used me. Empty promises, shared lies, borrowed charm. The luxury apartment was gone, the business shares tied up in court, his reputation quietly unraveling. He showed up at my door one rainy evening, drenched, desperate. "Elaine," he said, his voice shaking, "I made a mistake. She's gone. The money's gone. Everything's gone. Please, can we talk?" For a brief moment, I saw the man I once loved, older, smaller, broken. But I didn't open the door. I simply said, "You made your choice in front of the whole world, Gerald." I made mine quietly afterward. He looked at me, eyes wide, pleading. "We were married 40 years, Elaine. Doesn't that mean anything?" "Yes," I said softly. "It means I gave you 40 years of my life. And now I'm giving myself the rest." I closed the door. And I didn't cry. That night, I brewed myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the rain wash down the glass. For the first time in decades, the house felt peaceful. Not empty. Peaceful. I realized that love doesn't always end with fireworks or shouting matches. Sometimes it ends in quiet dignity, in choosing peace over pain. And I promised myself that whatever years I had left, they would belong only to me. The weeks that followed were quiet, the kind of quiet that feels both foreign and freeing. For 40 years, I'd lived in a house filled with someone else's footsteps, someone else's moods, someone else's needs. Now, every sound belonged to me. The clink of my teacup, the hum of the refrigerator, the shuffle of my slippers across the kitchen floor. It all felt mine. At first, I didn't know what to do with that silence. I'd wake up expecting to hear Gerald's voice in the shower, his keys jingling, the morning news humming from the living room. But the house only offered birdsong and the ticking of the old clock he'd once promised to fix. I thought the loneliness would crush me, but it didn't. It taught me something, that peace doesn't always come from company. Sometimes it comes from the absence of chaos, the legal proceedings wrapped up sooner than I expected. My lawyer called one morning, her tone light. "It's done, Elaine," she said. "You're officially free. The assets are split in your favor, and the court accepted our claim for financial misconduct. You'll be more than comfortable." I thanked her and hung up, staring at the sunlight streaming across the table. For the first time, the word free didn't scare me. It thrilled me. Gerald had tried to contact me a few times after that day at the door. Emails, letters, even flowers once. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because I'd realized something vital. You can't rebuild peace with the same person who shattered it. Michael and Emma visited often. At first, our conversations were awkward, filled with pauses and careful words. He was angry, protective, and still trying to understand how his father could do what he did. But slowly, our talks grew warmer again. One evening, over dinner, Michael said, "Mom, I've been thinking about how strong you've been through all this. I don't know if I could have handled it like you did." I smiled and touched his hand. "Strength isn't loud, sweetheart. Sometimes it's just getting up every morning and choosing not to break." He looked at me for a moment, then said, "Dad called me last week. He said he lost the last project he was bidding for." I nodded slowly. "Karma doesn't always come fast, Michael, but it always finds its way." He sighed. He asked if I could forgive him. I told him I wasn't ready. I smiled faintly. "That's okay. Forgiveness isn't a gift you give for free. It's something you offer when your heart is at peace, not before." The truth was, I had forgiven him, not because he deserved it, but because I did. Holding on to that anger was like drinking poison and expecting him to suffer, and I was done suffering. So I started small. I repainted the house, took down the old wedding photos, donated his clothes. I replaced the heavy drapes with light linen curtains, let sunlight flood every corner. Then, I joined a community group for women over 50. We met every Thursday for tea and stories. There were widows, divorcees, grandmothers, teachers, all women who had faced loss in one form or another. We laughed. We cried. We told our stories like old songs rediscovered. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. One of the women, Gloria, introduced me to her brother, Harold, a widower with a warm laugh and kind eyes. He ran a small bookstore downtown, the kind that still smelled of paper and dust and coffee. He didn't flirt, didn't rush. He just listened. We'd talk about books, about growing older, about how time has a funny way of healing you when you least expect it. He once said, "People think love fades with age, but maybe it just becomes quieter, like a song you hum instead of sing." I didn't know if I was ready to love again, but I knew I was ready to be seen again. And for now, that was enough. One afternoon, while browsing through his bookstore, I stumbled upon a collection of poems. A line caught my eye. She rebuilt herself from the pieces he left behind, and somehow she shined brighter than before. I bought the book, not because it was profound, but because it felt like my own reflection on the page. Months later, I heard that Gerald had moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. Rachel had married someone else. He'd lost most of his clients, his business credibility tarnished after the financial investigation. Part of me wanted to feel pity, but I didn't. He'd made his choices, and I had made mine. We were simply two lives that once intersected, now moving in separate directions. On my 61st birthday, Michael and Emma threw me a small dinner at home. We laughed, reminisced, and when they surprised me with a cake, I couldn't stop smiling. As I blew out the candles, I silently wished not for love or riches, but for peace, and I realized I already had it. That night after they left, I sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea. The stars shimmered above, the air smelled faintly of rain, and somewhere in the distance, an old song drifted through someone's radio, the kind Gerald and I once danced to. For a brief moment, the memories returned. The laughter, the young love, the hope. But they didn't hurt anymore. They were just memories. Beautiful, distant, and finally at peace. I've learned that life doesn't end when someone leaves you. It begins when you stop leaving yourself behind. If anyone watching this is going through something similar, betrayal, heartbreak, loss, please remember this. You don't have to fight to prove your worth. You only have to stand tall and let the truth speak for you. Dignity may not make noise, but it echoes longer than revenge ever could. When I look back on everything that happened, the wedding, the betrayal, the silence that followed, I realized something I wish I'd known sooner. Sometimes, God doesn't close doors to punish us. He closes them because we've forgotten what peace sounds like. For years, I thought love meant endurance, that if I stayed, forgave, and kept the house together, it would somehow fix what was already broken. But love without respect is like pouring water into a cracked vase. No matter how much you give, it will never stay full. When Gerald stood in that hall and announced his new beginning, I thought my life had ended. But it hadn't. It had finally begun. It took me 60 years to understand that being alone is not the same as being lonely, and that dignity, quiet, steady dignity, can heal wounds that no apology ever could. If you're listening tonight, maybe sipping your tea the way I do, and wondering if you'll ever feel whole again after someone's betrayal, I want you to know, you will. You just have to stop waiting for them to come back and start walking toward yourself. Because peace isn't something you find in another person. It's something you build, brick by brick, out of every heartbreak, every tear, every small moment where you choose not to give up. So tell me, my dear friends, if you were in my place that day, standing in front of your family, your heart breaking but your head held high, would you have walked out in silence like I did? Or would you have spoken your truth right there, in front of everyone? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and if my story touched you, even just a little, don't forget to subscribe and stay for the next story, because as I always say, every scar has a story, and every story has a lesson. Until next time, this is Auntie May, reminding you to choose peace, even when it whispers.